So Sonu, you are the costume designer of Genius. You were the costume designer last year on Genius when it was about Albert Einstein, and this year it's about Pablo Picasso. Um, Given the critical acclaim and the Emmy success, including for yourself, of season one, what were your expectations like going into season two?
Um, of course, the season one was about a scientific world and about a scientist, so it was much darker as a palette, and it was very restricted in a way for costumes because we had to follow certain standards, and it was very much the life of a scientist who did become a little more, looser in his style of dressing and all of that when he moved to America. But here we were talking about Picasso, and it's a whole different world. It's the Bohemia of Montmartre, and it's Franco Spain. We started with Franco Spain, and with the family in very dark colors for the women, and a whole different look as far as women's costumes were concerned, and men's as well. And then from Spain to the expo in Paris in 1900s, where it was the height of fashion, everyone had to come out with this universal expo, so we had to go into that world, and from that into the bohemian world, where it's all very much invented fashions, and basically people were a lot more looser in the way of dressing, and meaning that they were not sticking to the style of the moment. So we were creating that whole environment, all these artists and models and sculptors, and the whole poverty, but art lifestyle. Then from there we have Picasso lived so many different lives within this one big life of his. And from there, when he ended up selling art, and then when he married Olga, his lifestyle and his clothing and everything around him changed, because that's when he entered the world of fashion and money. And so the clothes changed again once again, and you see him going from workman's looking clothing from Montmartre, and he starts selling art, so he's wearing all these beautiful suits, and so we were entering the world of money and aristocracy and style. And then from there, once he starts establishing himself, and once he becomes aware of his own and of his own success, and where he was in life, and what his art meant. And he was one of the he was a rich artist. He was powerful, and he was successful in his lifetime. And when that happened, he started again in his clothing. That changed. He didn't need to dress up to get the respect. He didn't need to dress up to look the part. And his clothing became once again very mixed ensembles, striped trousers, these plaid trousers that he was wearing with different colors. And, a lot of times he'd walk around in shorts, just shorts and no shirts on. And his famous, the Breton striped sweaters. So again, that changed. So this was the core of Picasso that we brought from the young Alice to Antonio, that we had to bring this passage of time and the transitions that he went through within his career, and the different lives that he lived with the different women, the stories he had with the different women, the different friendships he had. So that very much reflected his clothing, his environment. So we had to go and capture all these different moments, and not only just Picasso, but the people around him, the women around him, the men around him, the artists, the poets, Jean Cocteau, so many people around him, Max Jacob. So we had to go in and recreate all these different worlds within the one big world of Picasso. So it was very exciting. It's like starting from 1881 and going up to 1973. It's a huge, it's almost a century, I say. It's 93 years of a man's life, of a man who changed so much over time. His art changed so much over time. The different mediums he used, the different, he was also, like I said, I was thinking he was also involved in politics, Guernica, and the dove for the peace symbol, So again, he was very much involved in politics. And then we had to recreate the political world around that time, So there were all these different opportunities. There were all these different worlds within the big world. So that was very exciting.
What were some of the research tools that you used?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
What were some of the research tools that you used for your work?
Um, the first thing I did was, again, it's such a huge story to tell, such a huge story to tell, because this man has been, he lived for so many years, and he's known by so many different people. So I just ended up going and watching a lot of documentaries. I just wanted to see different points of view of different people who knew him. So I ended up watching hours and hours of documentary, because I got to see footage of his life, and I got to hear what everyone was saying about him, how their relationship was with this man. And there were many common points, but there were also different points of view. So you got a different perspective of the same man, and how he was with different kinds of people. And so lots of documentaries, and reading books, and lots of photographs, looking at all the archive pictures. But I have to say, on this show, it was a lot of documentaries, a lot of footage, and just seeing his world from different perspectives.
You talked about how there was a progression in his wardrobe, the many kind of transformations that he undertook throughout his lifetime. I wonder if you could talk just a bit about how you planned all of that out, not just historically, but also in terms of, thematically, if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense. And that's what I love about these big shows. I love the passage of time. I love the transitions. I love the flow of the person's characters. So the documentaries gave me a very, because we don't shoot, and we shoot mixed, it's like we start from 1920s, then we end up going to 1975. So it's all mixed in. So we had to have a very clear idea in our head. I had to have a very clear idea in my head as to what the progression would be. So once I created lots of mood boards, I got all the different archive pictures of Picasso, and I created all these different mood boards of how he would change over time, because this way I knew where he would be at a certain point in his life. Where would he be at this point in his life, with this woman in his life, at this point of his career, where he's selling nothing, and he's living in Bateau Lovar, and he has no money, and he is depressed because his friend killed himself. And so we have, and then, or when he's so rich and he's so flamboyant, like he'd run around in these red shorts or white shorts, and and just barefoot, and and in between he has these powerful suits and coats. So I'd mapped out the main key points, and also keeping in mind what we were going to shoot, the stories we were going to tell, the parade where he was stage designing parade, and that's a whole nother life, where he goes in, or when he's involved with the communists, and he's going there with to talk about the peace deal with the communists. So we had to keep in mind all these different passages of time, and I had these huge, like, massive amounts of photographs, which were then condensed into different moments of his life. So once I had Picasso, the flow of Picasso's wardrobe, where he would start out and where he would end up being finally, we saw where Alex would start and where Antonio would come in. And, Alex he started out in Spain as a young artist, as a student, coming to France, coming to Paris, all dressed up in his corduroy suit, thinking that he's going to fit into this beautiful art world, and he wants to be like the artist. So he comes in, and then, of course, he lives that lifestyle, but then his friend kills himself, and that's when he goes into his blue period. And then that's when he is stuck in the studio just painting all these very strong and deep paintings, and that's when he's in his workman's clothing, like he wore all these big baggy pants, sweaters, the workman's jacket, which is the opposite of Matisse, because when Gertrude Stein comes into his life, Matisse is there, and on the other side of in his life at that time, and Matisse is all dressed in his tweed suits and his lovely white smock. And so we would contrast that, how one artist would perceive his outerwear, and how Picasso thought he was, like, he was creating art, and it wasn't about his look, it was more about creating art from within. So we could contrast the two, how they produced the art from within, because these guys, all these artists, were bringing out things which were innovative, very different. They were taking everything that was out there and changing it completely. And then when he ends up, designing, he becomes friends with Jean Cocteau, and then he ends up, going to design Parade. And that's when he meets Olga. And, she comes from a very beautiful, high-end Russian aristocracy. And then how being with her changes his clothing again, because then I think they spent time in London where he ended up getting all these beautiful suits made for him, and these coats. So again, we flow into that, and that's when the passage goes with from Alex. Will at some point Antonio comes in, and we see Antonio's youngest stage towards the end of the episodes. But we have to bear in mind when we're starting all of this that there will be a point of transition. So again, that's when Antonio and Alex's clothes kind of, blend into each other. So you see Alex transforming into Antonio. And then, of course, Antonio then has the older Picasso has his relationship with Dora Maar. And that's a whole different period because it's, Dora Maar, and she's this very powerful. Oh, before that is Marie Therese. And then there's Marie Therese, there's Dora Maar, who's a very powerful woman, and her clothing reflect that, big baggy trousers, nice shirts, very, very sure of herself, even though, she was very insecure inside, but his relationship with her, but from the outside, a very powerful woman. And then they go through war, World War I, World War II. How does that affect the clothing? Suddenly there's no electricity and, there's no coal. So we have to incorporate that into his wardrobe again, So Antonio was wearing these big sweaters and scarves, and at a certain point. So you take all the information you have and you have to translate that with your clothing onto the screen so that the audience gets the picture of where this artist is exactly at that time of his life. And then again, that transitions on, and he ends up staying with Francois Gillot, and that's his, where he's already an established artist. He is very much sure of himself. And as he grows, the more flamboyant he gets in a way, And then I read that he would make a lot of an Italian tailor was making him all these different clothing. So he had up to like 300, I think 200 trousers and 100 jackets. I don't know. He was very much into his clothing. And again, he's moved from suits into these crazy combinations. Like there were colors which were all, bold colors, bold prints. His Breton jersey sweater that he ended up wearing a lot, his shorts. And then towards the end, the clothes weren't a question of being in style as much as it was about how he felt and what he felt like wearing, because he was so powerful. He could be in his shorts and, be in the same room with the biggest art dealer because he didn't need to prove himself, and he could be exactly how he was dressed, and he didn't have to care about, appearances. And he would run around with these big masks. So he was very playful, I think, in his way of dressing towards the end. So I had to keep in mind all these different phases of his life, and keep in mind the actors who were playing Picasso, Antonio and Alex. And Antonio is much taller than Picasso, and Alex is taller than Picasso. And Antonio, dresses in a different way generally in life. He's much more, he's always very slim, his jeans. He's very slim looking. His way of dressing is generally very slimmer compared to Picasso, which is big and broad. And, Picasso had this thing about, just being, very strong and dominant, no matter what he wore, he just had this way of standing, which was huge. And all his clothings were a bit bigger. And Ken Billa asked me, he's like, how can we make Antonio look a bit shorter and not as, tall, not as thin as Picasso, because Picasso was bigger. So what I did was I ended up making all of his suits, the suits for Antonio. I had them made from very heavy fabrics. The structure was a much more stronger and broader and heavier. And the length of the jackets were a bit longer to make him look shorter. And the trousers were high-waisted with a little bit, the hems were a bit longer. But I had all these clothes made in wool at the end of the summer. So it was so hot. And I kept looking at the weather thinking, oh my God. And I was like hysterical. I'm like, what are we going to do? All these it wasn't cooling down at all. And then Antonio came for his fitting in Paris. It was, I think, the start of October, and was still warm. And I was thinking, oh my God, I've got all these wool clothes for him. What if he doesn't like them? What if he just looks at them and says, what have you done? And I've created like weeks of clothing, weeks of tailoring to make those clothes. So I had a backup plan. So I had some linen stuff and normal looking things in the back. But my main thing was these costumes, which were made very much bearing in mind Antonio and Picasso, and trying to take the essence of the two men and blend them and create this character to present to the world, And so Antonio came in. He had his little hat on, and he was, jumper and nice slim trousers. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so hot. So he came in, and I just said, look, I said, let's try these. We're just going to try and see what happens, and we'll see what happens now. So he says, don't worry, we'll start. And I gave him these trousers. They were big and baggy and warm. And I was like, okay, let's try it. And he put the trousers on. And then he had the shirt on, the jacket on. He put his hands in his pockets, and he looked right into the mirror, and he did this. He's saying, yes, I can feel him. I think I found him. And then that was a relief, because he embraced everything. He just took everything that, I had proposed and I had made for him. And he loved everything. And he just took all of that, and he owned his costumes, and he used them as if they were his own. And that's what I love about an actor. Actor comes in, and they need to own their clothing. They need to wear the clothing. They need to feel the clothing. I don't like when anyone touches their things in the fitting room, because if they're doing this in the fitting room, it's finished. You can't, then you're on camera and it's not going to work. So once we got Antonio's, the core look established, I took what we did with Antonio and brought that down to Alex, because again, Alex, was very similar, and the same approach. And again, Alex did the same thing. He was totally open to it. He again felt very good in his costumes. He felt that this was giving him a lot of tools, because the way you turn your shirt sleeves up, or the way you put your hands in the pocket, or the jacket, and they're slightly oversized or slightly shorter. So all these elements came into play, and both the men embraced what we were doing. And from that point onwards, I could think of all the people around them, because it's like a painting. Once you get the person in the middle, the person who is the story, Picasso, then you can do the women, you can do the men, you can do the background, you can do the 93 years of costumes that were, slowly and surely progressing. And many times in the same day, we would have all the different, eras. We'd start out in one era, then within 3 hours, we were in a different one, and with 300-400 people in background, sometimes 200, but sometimes 300, So uniforms for World War I, World War II, the Cuba War from 1890s. So a lot of things to put together.
Now, you were Emmy nominated last year for the first season. It was one of 8 nominations that the show received overall. What did that kind of recognition mean for you? It was your first Emmy nomination as well. So
yes, it felt really good. I was hoping, that I would get recognized, but I wasn't sure, because you never know. And I was actually in St. Peter's. I live in Rome. And I was in St. Peter's that day, and I came out. I was there for a reason, and I came out of St. Peter's, and my phone started buzzing, and I was standing in this big square in Rome, and it says, you've been nominated. And I just looked at, Cleopatra's Needle in the middle of Rome, and I was looking. I'm like, now what do I do? Which way do I go? Who do I call? And I just stood there. I just stood in Rome, and I felt, everything was circling. I just felt very good, and I felt very grateful. We all work so hard, not just me, every person in the team. We show up every day, and on shows like this, which these shows are magnificent, because you get an opportunity to create so many different eras in one show. And my entire team that works so hard, the tailors, the set people, the background people, the prep people. So I was very proud for myself. I was very proud for my team. I was very proud for Ken, for NatGeo, for Ron Howard, for everybody who puts so much effort into what we do, and so much love, because these Genius 1 and Genius 2 have been made. They are labors of love, both of these. There's a lot of love and passion in these 2 shows. So I felt very grateful.
Well, congratulations on another great season of Genius, and thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.